Welcome, everyone. I'm glad everyone is here. Hopefully, it's not bad weather that's affecting connectivity. I'm just going to mute all the panelists right now so we have a clear sound here. Welcome. For those of you that would like to turn on your closed captioning, usually there is a icon with closed captioning in the bottom left corner. We are recording these webinars. All of the resources and webinar slides will be made available on our YouTube channel. We will email you once we post and archive the webinar and the recording, obviously. So welcome to our fourth Healthy Brain webinar series, which is presented by HealthMatters program. We're at the University of Illinois at Chicago in partnership with the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability at the ARC of US. I won't go into introducing every presenter today. I will let everyone introduce themselves. Today's webinar, the title is Beyond Silos, Trauma-Informed Care for People with Intellectual and Developmental Disability. A panel of experts is here, and they will highlight key learnings from this webinar series related to discrimination of people with disabilities in accessing culturally appropriate healthcare and how intentional collaboration between healthcare and disability communities can prevent abuse, neglect, exploitation, and trauma among people with intellectual disability. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording the webinar. Continuing education credits are not offered for the webinar. Please use the chat box for comments and questions. We will usually have about 10-15 minutes of question and answer after the first 45 minutes of presentation. And welcome, everyone. Leanne?
Thank you so much for that introduction. And just to kick us off, we go to the next slide. If you have been with us before, this is number 4 and our final webinar of this series. So we're excited to bring you such a great panel today of people from all over the country here to talk about their own experience in really building collaborative efforts on this issue specifically. So if we can just go down and each person just give a brief introduction of yourself so everyone can get to know you a little before we dive into some questions later. Let's start with Teresa.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you all for asking me to be on this panel today. I'm really excited to be here. I am Teresa Anderson. I'm the Executive Director for the California Policy Center for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And it's a brand new policy center in California, so we're excited to see how we continue to build. And I come to you today with, well, over 30 years experience in different areas of serving and supporting and advocating with and for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So thank you, Leanne. I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Teresa. All right, how about Patty?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Patty Quateri. I work at the Disabled Person Protection Commission of Massachusetts and peer support, and I'm co-chair of PSN National Peer Support Network.
Thank you, Patty. And Jennifer? Up, you're muted, or we can't hear you, or something.
I was muted.
There we go.
It's nice to follow another ERI at the end of the last name, Patty. But my name is Jennifer Sperry. I am NAPSA, the National Adult Protective Service Association's Executive Director. I am based in Philadelphia, but we have an office in DC, and we are basically a membership organization for adult protective services programs across the country and in the territories. And our clients are 18 and up. So people with disabilities, the older adults, anybody who may be a victim or survivor of abuse, neglect, exploitation, and neglect. Did I say that? Sorry.
Yes.
Neglect,
abuse, and exploitation. Yes.
Abuse,
Thank you.
Yep.
And Keisha.
Hello everybody. My name is Keisha Weller, and I have been working as a abuse prevention awareness advocate for since 2012 with an expertise in sexual assault. I am also the co-chair with Patty Katori for the Peer Support Network. And I have many other hats that I wear in terms of my abuse work. And it's really an honor to be talking with such an esteemed panel of colleagues, and have everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Keisha. And finally, Kimberly.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I can't get my camera to turn on. I wish I could, but I'm Kimberly Yellowrobe, and I'm an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe from South Dakota, and I am in Mesa, Arizona. I am the Associate Director, Tribal Coordinator for Banner University Health Plan. So thank you for the invitation to sit on this panel. I look forward to sharing.
Thank you so much. And yes, thank you to this great panel for being here today and taking the time to prepare as we all spoke together earlier last week about this topic. So let's dive into what our objectives are for today's webinar. So let's go to the next slide. These are things we want you to keep in mind as you hear from the different panel members today. What can you really take away from what we're presenting? I'm quite sure you're going to walk away with something you didn't know before, because we do have a really diverse panel of different ideas today. So one of the first things we want to think about is how you can pull 2 to 3 key learnings from today's webinar that healthcare professionals can put into action to ensure equitable treatment. So that has been key to this webinar series all along, is looking at that key piece of equitable treatment. How do we make that happen? A second thing is to name at least one way healthcare providers can intentionally, and that's a key word too, intentionally build effective collaboration between healthcare and disability communities to address this topic of violence and abuse. And then finally, thanks to Jennifer, we will get an explanation of a more thorough explanation even of the National Adult Protective Services Administration. Learn more about what their role is in supporting people with disabilities who experience violence and abuse. So those are your 3 key takeaways. So be thinking about that and looking for what your key takeaway will be at the end of our webinar today. Let's go to the next slide. And again, if you've been joining us on this series, you do remember our case scenario that we've been using at each webinar to really address different vantage points of the same scenario and pulling out different key learnings each time. So if you don't mind, Keisha, can you kind of set it up for us, and then we'll have a question afterwards?
Yes, of course, Leanne. Be my pleasure. Keisha and her caretaker go to the doctor because she has an infection. The caretaker tells the doctor why they are there. Keisha's quiet. The doctor invites the caretaker to the waiting room. Keisha begins to feel more relaxed. Keisha tells the doctor she hurts. The doctor notices a large bruise on her arm and examines it. Joan, a nurse, Keisha knows, is invited into the room and is pleasant. The doctor mentions sometimes people with intellectual developmental disabilities, or IDD for short, have unwanted sex. Keisha says it happened to her friend. The doctor shows Keisha a chart with body parts and asks Keisha where it hurts because it's very uncomfortable to talk about it. Keisha explains she has been forced to have sex and she hates it. Joan gives Keisha a card with a resource number to call for support. The doctor and the nurse use gentle tones and make eye contact with Keisha. Even though Keisha was traumatized, she was comfortable talking with the doctor. The doctor uses everyday language, and Keisha understands what was being told to her.
Thank you, Keisha. And just as a reminder, you can link to this video, which is on the slide that you see in front of you. And also we can put the video link in the chat again. But these are great tools that you can use when you're looking to educate healthcare providers in your area about this issue specifically. And thank you to Keisha for all the work that you've done on this project to make sure that we can educate as many as possible in the healthcare profession. And so what we wanted to pull out in terms of a question this time is to kind of say it in this way. We know that Keisha wants to talk to her doctor about ways healthcare professionals can be more involved in this topic. So what are some different ways you think that healthcare providers can get involved, either through collaborations, if it's conferences, trainings, different ideas like that? So I want everyone in our audience today to be thinking about that as we hear first from Kimberly Yellowrobe. If you have any thoughts about how that can happen, please put that in the chat and we'll take a look at that. But Kimberly, I want to hand it over to you to provide a response to this and also consider the lens of working in the tribal community.
Yes, thank you, Leanne. So my colleagues and I are part of the Arizona Disability Network, and we've come together as collaboratives, health plans, to join this network. And we will be creating a tribal landing page for the Arizona Disability Network website, and with support from the Arizona ARC. So we really want to get this information out there because it is tribal specific information. And if individuals out there, that are American Indians, want to seek services by other individuals that look just like them, these provider resources and networks will be available through the landing page. It's a very different scenario out there, on reservation lands. Sometimes the communities are very small. So to maintain their own privacy and confidentiality, individuals can choose to seek off-reservation services if they need them. We'll also provide resources such as the Southwest Indigenous Women's Coalition, who currently houses a lot of these resources already. And what we've done is through collaboration with Leanne's team and Leanne, with my program, Banner University Health Plans, we actually requested the associate director from Banner Hospital to conduct SANE training for our tribal advocates. So I work on the health plan side of Banner, and there's a hospital side. So we're bridging this information because it's really important that the community that we serve and also the providers that serve our communities have these particular specific resources available to them. So that's how important we think collaboration is, and also providing training to our tribal sexual assault, domestic violence advocates. Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks, Kimberly. And I know we're going to hear from you in a little bit too, but I think that's a great kind of introduction to what we're talking about today, and really thinking through maybe what connections have we missed, or that we haven't been able to make a connection long enough for it to last. I think we've all been in that situation. So really keeping that conversation going, and how do we do that over a long period of time. So I love your suggestions. Thank you for those. And I am not seeing my chat right now. So Jasmina, can you see if there's anyone responded in the chat?
No responses so far. Do you want to ask the question again?
Sure. So I was just, and you don't have to answer right now. If you want to throw it in the chat as we're going through the day, that's fine too. I was just wondering if anyone had thought of different ways that healthcare providers can get involved in collaborations. If you know of any collaborations going on where you've got the disability folks in with healthcare, um, specifically around this issue of sexual violence, we want to know about it. We're looking for those collaborations that are going on throughout the country. And so little by little, we're connecting the dots and trying to figure out, how do we really learn from each other learn how this is happening in different communities and different states, and we're trying to grow that movement. So keep thinking about that, and feel free to put that in the chat as we move forward. So we can go to the next slide. So you may recall, if you joined us on our last webinar, we did not completely get through it because we had so much great discussion. But I wanted to just remind you that these were sort of the key lessons learned in the last webinar. One of the first things that we talked about is that we need a new approach, moving from peer to professional leader. So Patty did a great job speaking to this issue in the webinar, talking about wanting a real seat at the table and to be heard, not only as a survivor with disabilities, but as a leader in this space. And so that was a key lesson learned. Another one is looking at peer-led coalitions and networks. And both Keisha and Patty talked about their work in California and Massachusetts and the work that they are doing nationally. But we have to keep in mind that this doesn't happen on its own and that people need supports. Anyone who wants to be a leader in anything needs supports. And people with disabilities are no different. And so we need to keep that in mind as we support people who are wanting to share their lived experience. Another one is learning about ableism and why it is a key barrier to having equity. And ableism is discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. And one example that we talked about was how some people with disabilities were actually turned away and not given the opportunity to be served at their local local doctor's offices. They were told that they were booked. They would give different excuses, and they actually couldn't even get services. So that is an obvious way that ableism impacts whether or not people with disabilities can get the services they need. Expert facilitation is also needed in this area, not someone who speaks for the person, but someone who helps the person get their message across. One of the things we talked about is the key saying nothing about us without us. And sometimes when we try to advocate, we may talk too much. And sometimes we may take too much space up in the room. And the thing that we need to remember is that we're here to provide supports and make sure that people with disabilities have every opportunity to say what they know, what they believe, what their truth is in these issues. Training for professionals, especially Disability 101, is a continued need. And it was actually working with Jennifer at NAPSA that we did a survey recently after a great webinar series where we asked folks what they wanted to learn most. And they chose Disability 101. So we know this continues to be a need in the field. And then we know things are getting better, but there is more to do. So that's why we're thinking about the future and how do we connect collaborations throughout the country. So let's go on to the next slide. And I think on that note, this is a great time to get a little more deeper into who our panel members are today and to meet some of the change makers who are out there making a difference every day on this topic. And we'll just go down the list here, starting with Keisha. What we'd like to hear is the purpose of your agency or your network or whoever you're representing today, your agency's journey to greater engagement and collaboration, and then what can the IDD community do differently to have more of an impact. So Keisha, do you want to get us started? Can we hear you? Uh-oh. Oh, Keisha, we can't hear you. Do you have your...
I did unmute my. I was muted.
Ah, well, now you're not. We can hear you, so please feel free to
Thank
to
you.
answer.
I appreciate it. Just a minute. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Science Equals Finance Network. The purpose of it is to bring together people with disabilities, organizations, and agencies that support the aging community and disabilities to prevent sexual violence and abuse from happening in California. And if it does happen, make sure there is appropriate services and support available. Ways we make it happen. Meet and learn from different organizations, share new ideas, programs that promote prevention, and learn about new policies. Participants go back to their networks, share the information, and encourage collaboration with each other. Members are also encouraged to bring issues they are working on and discuss them at the meeting to gain input and new ideas. Very important to me, consistent encouragement for everyone to come outside their silos. Our journey to greater engagement and collaboration. We are open to new organizations participating. Participants are from the California Department of Developmental Services, the Attorney General's Office, the Ombudsman, Department of Aging, and the three California USEDs, which is University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and self-advocates like myself. We also sponsor presentations of new programs and offer many trainings on accessible communication using plain language and creating accessible webinars and outreach materials so people can use the resources. What can the IDD community advocates and professionals do differently to have a greater impact on sexual violence prevention? We want you guys to collaborate with aging networks and the government, working together with self-advocate survivors on grants. More coalitions that include people with disabilities, healthcare, and law enforcement. Increase conversations at advocacy meetings, learn more about consent, reporting abuse, and most importantly, our rights. Be equal participants in all trainings.
Thank you, Keisha. There was some really good points on how the IDD community can do things differently. So I appreciate you putting your thinking cap on that one to help us kind of, look at all the possibilities. So we know that California's got some good things going on, and we will hear from Teresa here in a second. But next on my list is Kimberly again. And I guess, Kimberly, I will just say a few words since we're working together on this project. I do work at the Arts National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, but one of our projects that we are so excited about is this Arizona network on sexual violence and IDD. And we are getting the opportunity. All last year, we did strategic planning through working with key folks in the state. There was already a collaborative meeting, but we had the opportunity to really kind of tighten the vision, get some goals and objectives, and start doing some measuring around that. And then this year, we're focused on putting on a statewide conference on the topic, the first one of hopefully more to come. And what has been so exciting is that through that process, I met Kimberly, who is a force of nature. She's been doing so much work both in the disability community and of course in the tribal community too. So I'll hand it over to you, Kimberly, just to talk a little bit more about the network. Are you on mute? Can we hear you? Let me see. Do we still have Kimberly?
I think we've lost Kimberly.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, luckily, I know a lot about this network, so I'll fill in and hopefully she can come back for the next question. But just to kind of give you a sense of the mission of this network, we actually were created because there was a case that happened in Arizona that actually went national of someone who ended up who was raped several times by a person where this individual was living. And because the person was not mobile and couldn't speak, this was a huge blow to the state. And because it gained so much notoriety and press around it, it really kind of got the state going in terms of looking at what are they going to do about this issue. And that started the collaborative. But as I said, about 2 to 3 years later, they looked to doing more of a strategic plan around that. And the mission that this group had formed is really looking at how do they reach people that are least likely to get help and to get served. And so that's why we brought on Kimberly, looking at tribal communities. We're really looking at all different aspects of this issue. And what's very exciting is holding that first conference this year, hopefully what will be an ongoing conference. And we've seen how through outreach in different communities with healthcare providers and others in the state, that there has been a momentum growing, but it takes that consistent support and capacity. And so I think that's something that we continue to work on and think about always in the future. How do we keep the movement growing? So let's now hear from Patty. Are you ready to tell us about the Peer Support Network?
The purpose is raising awareness of sexual violence against people with disability, partners with other peer support groups, do trainings, provide trainings and workshops for professionals. The way we make it happen, do webinars and conference workshops, so professionals know abuse happen more often. People with disabilities, partners with other self-advocacy organizations, and speak at the conference. Workshops with our partners and participate in webinars for professional, write blogs, post on important topics. We working on our own website. Cooperate with peer support leaders from Disabled Person Protection Commission for experts, ideas, input. A journey to greater engagement and collaboration. We start with the natural convening of after self-advocates, survivors, and professionals at the NAFSA conference 2018. We reach out to NAFSA, the Art and Advocacy Organization. We want to make sure everyone knows that self-advocate survivors can provide training and pointing to other survivors. It's important so they're not alone and get resources they can use. What can the IDD community advocacy professional do different to have a great impact on sexual assault, sexual violence prevention? We can change a lot of things. Keep our focus on trauma, not on disability. Do not discriminate people by not paying attention to the trauma. Listen to us. Believe what we say. Support us getting the resource we need.
Thank you, Patty. That was really helpful. I want to make sure I didn't cut you off, though. Are you still trying to speak?
No.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you so much for that. I know some of those things that you and I have talked about, and in our group, we continue to think about ways to ensure that people with disabilities have that seat at the table. And I think some of those that you mentioned there are perfect examples, very concrete examples that we can all be doing to just make that happen more where we are in our different states and communities. So thank you for that. And now I will hand it over to Teresa. Teresa, do you want to tell us about the Valor Grant?
I would love to. Thank you, Leanne. I'll start with the first question that we were asked is what is the agency purpose? So the California Policy Center for IDD is a nonpartisan think tank established to inform, support, and improve upon statewide policies that impact the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Our focus is to identify priorities and challenges within the IDD community and to provide policy recommendations based on objective, evidence-based research, data, and policy analysis to help inform the community as well as the policymaking process, because we know that that's the important part, that seeing the outcome. In our journey to greater engagement and collaboration, I'm very excited because our journey really has just begun. We're new and we're really looking at you know how we want to strategically look at outreach and you know, engagement and in our collaboration. So we have a great team and all of us are in the process of creating a strategic plan for outreach and engagement statewide. Our director of outreach and engagement is Dave Manson. He's a great guy and he has a background in community organizing. So he really understands the importance of relationships, of collaborating. And I think one of the biggest things that I want to focus on in this conversation is building trust, not just within the community, but with all the relevant stakeholders. And those will really be the underlying principles that guide our work as we engage in our journey to build a strong, inclusive, and diverse network of interested parties. And then what can, you know, what can we do different? Well, that's where the ARC, that's where the Valor grant comes in. The ARC California and Valor partnered to work on this grant. So it's a really great step forward in the larger picture of how we engage with stakeholders that may or may not be familiar with our communities in the first place, or we might not be familiar with their community. So over the last few years, when I was the policy director for the ARC and United Cerebral Palsy California collaboration, we had the opportunity to engage in this partnership, and Valor represents all the rape crisis centers in California. So the purpose of the grant was to expand capacity of the rape crisis centers to serve people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And prior to the grant beginning, the reason this grant came to be is prior to all of this, we had been working on different, you know, collaborations in the community, different organizations that we were working to at least raise the issue of abuse in terms of awareness and victim support services in the state. So we kind of put the cart before the horse, if you will, because when we did that, you know, rape crisis centers started getting a lot of calls, but what we heard in return was they were being turned away because they didn't have the capacity or the resources to properly serve them. So that's really what sort of initiated the grant. And I will say the biggest challenge that we faced in building our collaboration was figuring out a way to overcome our respective legal duties, because rape crisis counselors in the course of counseling have a different duty. Theirs is of confidentiality, and the survivor is the holder of that privilege. So we really had to struggle to balance our responsibility as mandated reporters, and that was a big, huge challenge. But we were not about to let that derail our project whatsoever. And it really did take a while, but what we did was we continued to work together. We continued to forge forward in our collaboration, and the things that we could agree on, we really, you know, were spot on our policy development on that. And the things that we couldn't agree on, we really had to you know, stick it through and come up with ways that we would still be able to meet our respective legal duties and responsibilities. And pretty soon you will see a best practices guide coming out. So that's something that was the outcome. And I will say it wasn't perfect. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best solution for being able to continue our work together. And I really appreciated the fact that we worked hard to build that collaboration. We had to believe in each other's and backing up a little bit, and then I'll pass it on, was the fact that for the rape crisis centers and their sexual violence movement, this was born out of domestic violence. The privilege, the confidentiality, that was something entirely different than the responsibilities born out of protecting people in the IDD space, who, why we have mandated reporting laws in the first place. So it was bridging those two issues and respecting the fact that in the domestic violence world, mandated reporting is a strong deterrent for seeking services. So we had to be respectful of all the work that they've done, to serve the population that they serve. And then they had to be respectful of all that we've done to come to this point. But then where do the two mesh? And that was the big thing that we really, really had to work on. So what we can do differently is that work, listen to each other, really understand that we come from different perspectives sometimes, but respecting that is, I think, key. And it was outside our comfort zone. We had to be okay with being outside our comfort zone for a little while to have these tough conversations without judgment. Like, how can you not report? How can you do it? We couldn't, come at it like that. So I think that's what we need to do, is really just take a step back and respect each party's perspective, knowing that we're probably going to be outside of our comfort zone for a little bit. So that's the Valor Grant, and I was really happy to be a part of it and work on it. And I'm looking forward to seeing the deliverables that come of that grant.
Wow, thank you, Teresa. I think you really hit on some key areas there that probably everyone participating today is going, yep, had that experience. When you collaborate, sometimes you come up against those really hard issues. And I think your key takeaway of sticking with it and being patient and working through is really helpful. I think just for encouragement purposes, when we all are trying to get around the table and continue. So some really good points made, and we'll hear from you again. So thank you for that. But I want to move over to Jennifer. How about we hear from you?
All right. I'm kind of the odd man out here, huh? But I'm glad to have a seat at this table, because we've had some of those conversations like you mentioned. So the purpose of NAPSA since 1989, Adult Protective Services was an unfunded mandate initially. So just like all great government programs, we had no money, but had the passion and the will to do it. So NAPSA started in 1989, about probably 10, 15 years after Adult Protective Services was written into the Older Americans Act. And NAPSA wanted to provide a forum for sharing information, solving problems, and improving the quality of services they offer to their clients. So it initially started with state administrators saying, what do we do here? We have no funds, but we have this law. How do we do this? So our mission has turned into strengthening the capacity of APS after social service block grant funding has come about. States are, finding the money, and now there's recently federal funding. But NAPSA is still there to strengthen the capacity of APS at the national, state, and local levels. We are really interested in effectively and efficiently recognizing, reporting, and responding to the needs of elders and those adults with disabilities who may be experiencing the abuse, neglect, financial exploitation that we spoke about earlier. And we want to really try to prevent it whenever possible. That's the ultimate end goal here, is not to have APS continue to grow. We don't want the numbers to continue to increase. I'd like to be out of a job someday, I always say, because we'd like to eradicate abuse. But that said, APS has a very firm foundation in self-determination and autonomy, and we support our clients' rights to make decisions about their own lives. Even if we may not live that way, it's their life. They are adults after all. So I heard you, Patty, loud and clear when you said, believe us, when it comes to working with clients. That's number one for APS, is we talk to the client. We believe them. All the noise around with the family and neighbors, and the person we are charged to serve is that person with a disability or the older adult that had the report called in. So this foundation of autonomy and self-determination, in my opinion, really nicely aligns with the nothing about us without us, because it's all about person-centered, focused care. So our journey, APS's journey towards the greater engagement and collaboration, I'm following my homework assignment here, Leanne, but our journey really began years ago when we started thinking, we can't do this alone. Adult Protective Services, we work with legal professionals, medical professionals, financial institutions, the disability organizations. So we recently really recognized this, probably in the last 15, 20 years, I guess, in multidisciplinary teams that are popping up everywhere. And they are so crucial for APS. And APS typically leads them throughout the country. And these multidisciplinary teams really increase the understanding, the collaboration, talk about difficult conversations sometimes when you tell a legal service provider or a police officer, I can't share this information with you. We have clear confidentiality here about our clients. But you increase that understanding and we each understand our our charges, So these multidisciplinary teams have been really invaluable. And approximately a quarter of APS cases called in 18 years old and up. There's only one state that only serves 60 years and up. I think it's Ohio. I'm not positive though. So approximately a quarter of our cases though are called in regarding people with disabilities under 60 years old. So that's a significant number in my opinion. And that doesn't mean every case is opened because each state has its own criteria. But I think that's where we've really we've embraced the multidisciplinary teams, the task forces that are out there just to increase the conversations, the understanding. But recently, we've begun to organize a disability interest group at NAPSA, and along with the help with Mark and Leanne and Sally from Wisconsin, we want this interest group to inform our board of directors and our membership. We have about 2,500 members now, and it's growing every day. Unfortunately, it's growing, right? I like for it to grow, but that's dissonance in my head. To inform the board and our membership about movements and developments in the disability field, in the world of people with disabilities. And we want people with disabilities themselves to inform the board. It's not just going to be all the talking heads in organizations. We want people like Patty and Keisha to serve on this interest group. And I really look forward to getting this group up and running because it's gonna make some waves and really influence the future. So I suppose my last answer for the last bullet point is what can the IDD community do differently to have a greater impact on sexual violence prevention? I think it's really about, like I said, find your task forces, offer some trainings, find your police departments. I mean, I almost feel like it's the same thing APS is doing, but you just got to get your word out there. But the task forces and multidisciplinary teams are a great start. Offer some education, explain what you guys do. The PSN is not the only group out there, the peer support network, but they were kind of like the founding fathers or the founding mothers, whatever you want to call it. But they really, I mean, nothing about us without us. And getting your way into these organizations and these task forces to really talk about collaborating and understanding each other's sides of the world. So seek out and join a task force or begin one if there's not one. Those are my last little tidbits. Thank you.
That is great, Jennifer. And actually, I'm going to keep you off mute for a second as we go to the next slide, because now we're moving into what are some tips to build effective collaboration. Yep. And I think we were going to ask you, what is a doable action that people can take to increase this work? And you have already mentioned a few of those, but did you just want to highlight one from that list?
I think, like I said, engaging people in engaging the task forces and communities, because I know you come to my task force that I had here in Philadelphia. There are going to be members of that task force that just are sponges for information about how should we work with people with disabilities. Well, first of all, talk to them, like Patty Patty said, believe us. But really, it's engaging people and talking with them and understanding and just having the conversation. It doesn't have to be as formal as a task force, but inviting and seeking out those organizations to expand your network. So that's my thought on this. Very doable. Pick up the phone. I mean, I make it so simple, but it really is that simple.
Thank you. And that does make it, when we put it in doable chunks, I think that makes it more more approachable, and we feel like maybe there is something we can do, and never think, and there is no action too small, I think,
Right.
is what we talk about.
It's knowing that person to call when you need them too. You know,
Mhm.
it's just knowing the different players out there in the peer support networks in your local area, just having somebody to call on and building those relationships over time. So
Yes. Well,
simple but
thank
doable.
you. Thank you for
Yeah.
all of that. And now let's look at internal and silo bias. So how does the silos, how does that impact really our ability to have collaboration together? And Keisha, I think you wanted to mention a couple of points on this one.
Leanne, before we move on, there was a question for Jennifer and you. Is it worthwhile to clarify that while PHI is not shared without written consent, accommodations may be shared and memorialized in reports with violating HIPAA?
Are you
That's
talking in relationship to APS, I'm assuming? I mean, I think it's worthwhile to talk about APS does have strict confidentiality codes within each state statute. It can, without violating HIPAA. So HIPAA, God, this could go really in the weeds here, but HIPAA has a clause in it where doctors and healthcare professionals, if they have a concern, may share with Adult Protective Services. But I can tell you from personal experience, healthcare professionals take that seriously, and they should. But if they have concerns, that's when you really do hear from them. And in the same vein, APS, Adult Protective Services, does not prohibit accommodations sharing. See, I wish this person could talk with us. This is what I mean, pick up the phone, right? But there are confidentiality requirements around the information that APS shares, and it's very strict. So HIPAA does not prohibit accommodations sharing. So they allow that. Okay, this is where you would be great on a task force with me.
Yes. Well, actually, John, thank you for the question. And we do quite a bit of work with John Gottschall, who's with the ARC of Benton County in Oregon. So glad that you are here as a healthcare provider yourself who knows quite a bit about this issue. And I think we could do a whole other webinar just on that topic. And
I
maybe
think it is.
we should consider
I
it.
know. Well, consent is a good point there, because APS does get written consent from their clients, but then there is that stipulation in HIPAA, and people will argue it. That is the difficult conversations that we've had, before. It's if somebody's concerned, though, typically they will bring it up. So yeah, we could have a whole separate webinar on this.
Yeah.
Consent is an important thing.
Absolutely. So was that the only question for now, I think?
Looks
Yeah.
like it.
Okay. So Keisha, do you want to talk a little bit about the silos and how that impacts us being able to have better collaboration?
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure to, because internal and silo bias, how that impacts development, the silo mindset. The silo mentality is a rigid way of thinking. A person might have a hard time seeing beyond the established ways of doing things. They may lack, quote, fluid intelligence, unquote, thinking flexibility across boundaries. Some negative effects of working in silos. Silos can obstruct communication and slow progress. Staying in silos, disability, healthcare, and other silos, they isolate us from each other, and we sometimes end up duplicating work. Some disadvantages of silos: limited connection with people outside our own silos. They can also cause resistance to change, meaning that people within their own silos are very resistant to move outside their silos to collaborate with other people. A holistic mindset is a holistic mindset team has open and constructive debates and open to learn new things from each other and collaborate. Holistic thinking lends itself to being flexible with tolerance. Silence equals violence network start to break down our silos so we can be more effective in responding to abuse with people with disabilities and older persons. Some tips to breaking down silo mentality. Have a unified vision of collaboration. Work together common goals using collaboration tools available online. And very important, educate, work, and train together. Plus, most of all, communicate often with each other outside our own silos. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. I know you've done a lot of work. I mean, you've been doing this a long time, and I know that you've picked up different tips like that throughout all the collaborations that you work in. So I appreciate you bringing those really good ideas to us today. Let's look at healthcare and disability working together. How do we get there? Teresa, do you want to give us a couple of pointers?
I would love to, because this is definitely one of my favorite subjects and something I've spent a lot of time working on. It begins way before the visit. There's so many barriers to making it difficult to access healthcare for people with IDD. And in California, the majority of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities are on Medi-Cal, the state's Medicaid program. So it can be a challenge to find a healthcare provider in the first place, let alone someone that has experience providing healthcare to a person or people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But recently, I've had the very good fortune to work with the UCLA Graduate School of Nursing. A professor there by the name of Benisa Salem has worked tirelessly to develop nursing school classes and curriculum that are inclusive of the IDD population. And she's partnered with different service providers to ensure that her students get the experience and exposure to providing healthcare services to, a wide range of individuals within the IDD community, and some with, more complex health conditions. She's also really engaged her students. This is the part I think that, it's hand in hand, but she's really engaged her students and challenged them to, take a deeper look at understanding the policies in healthcare that impact people with IDD. So I think, by identifying those challenges and barriers to care, that's a big thing that we need to do. But, I think, we know there's certain things we know that are a given. We know that there's limited access to providers who are knowledgeable about providing care to people with IDD, but we know that programs, and there's several out there doing really incredible work, like the UCLA Graduate School of Nursing. They're really, really working hard to change that. We also need reimbursement models that are more reflective of what it takes to provide care, because it does take a longer appointment time sometimes. It does take a little bit more understanding, some of the opportunities to talk take longer. And some of the clinics, quite frequently, their appointment times are pretty tight. And some of the really busy clinics here in California, a few years back, we looked, and some of the appointment times were, 8 to 15 minutes, and they expect you to turn those over pretty quick. That's not enough time. So we really need to create practices where physicians are respected and reimbursed for the time that they do actually need to provide that service. And we also need to work with individuals, families, the healthcare providers, to understand the role of supported decision making in healthcare, and really walk down that road of empowering individuals to be part of their own healthcare decisions, because I think we haven't been great about that historically. I know that's changing, but there's a lot to do to bridge that gap still, and really having supported decision making being, you know, a big part of healthcare making decisions for individuals. So that's what I think we can do to bridge that gap.
That's great. And I'm already like thinking publication in my head. Like I want a tip sheet now after hearing all of you. This is so good. And I see that we only have 5 minutes left. Is that right, Jasmina?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. So I have a few more slides. So I'm going to have to move around a little bit. So thank you for your patience with me as I do that. I want to go ahead to the next slide, the call to action. This is sort of our wrap up and key points that we would like you to take with you today. When we talk about focusing on educating healthcare, we're talking about thinking about the trauma first and not the disability. That's what Patty said at the beginning of this webinar. Sometimes the disability is the first thing thought of among healthcare providers and others, police as well. Those in the field that may not even think about how often trauma is happening to people with disabilities. And then considering how to support people with IDD and allies to advocate for trauma-informed services. So locating opportunities for survivors to lead training, looking for ways to co-author articles and publications like what now we want to create based on today, taking charge of your own bias. So it means, you know, being aware of like what Keisha talked about, that subtle and not so subtle form of ableism, that, you know, we all have subtle forms of different things in us, and just being willing to really take an honest look at where we are on this and how could it be impacting how we provide healthcare or other services, or how we are friends with people with disabilities. And then engaging services in all aspects of training, advocacy, and policy development is so important. But that supportive piece of that, and really making sure that capacity piece is there, that we have the funding streams to help provide the support for people with disabilities to be the voice on this issue, we have to find a way to do that better. So that is our call to action. Let's move to the next slide. We wanted to leave you with these articles since the series is completing today. If you ever want to go back and look at some really good articles from key issues that we brought out throughout the series, please take a look at these. The next slide talks about where to find all these different webinars. We have a link here, so you can go straight to that place on YouTube. Please share this with others, and if questions come up as you're looking at these different webinars, please feel free to reach out to us. We do have our contact information here coming up on the next slide, if you want to move to that. Next slide, please. And there's myself, Leanne, Patty, Mark, and Keisha. And then the next slide provides you with contact information of our guest speakers today, who just joined us new today. And that's Teresa, Kimberly, and Jennifer. And then for the next slide, I wanted to see if Patty and Keisha, you could close this today by talking about how you keep the lines of communication open with healthcare providers. Patty, what do you want to go first?
Sure. So when I go to the doctors, I always, when at the end of the appointment, I always say thank you. It matters to the doctors, because if you don't say thank you, they'll treat you badly the next time. We always make sure I say thank you, because they take time they take an hour on me because of my disability. So I do train them for sure to treat everyone in the same way as people without disability.
Thank you, Patty. Great point. Saying thank you matters. And you're the one that reminded us of that as we were preparing for this webinar. And I really appreciate that you brought that point up. And Keisha, I think you had talked about doing the same thing. Did you want to mention that?
Oh, very much so. because whenever I go to a healthcare provider, I I have so much gratitude for them for their care that they give me, and so I always tell them I deeply appreciate you in the care that you give to me and to other patients as well. It's very important to have gratitude in life.
Well, I appreciate that you both really wanted to raise that point as we ended the series, and that it is important to remember that collaboration means saying thank you. That when we show up together to want to do the hard work, sometimes address really hard issues, that is showing respect for each other, and that it matters enough that we're taking the time and energy to do this work. So we do thank the healthcare providers out there, all of you who are really working to make true change that we can see that can really impact the lives of people with disabilities. That's what this work is about. So I think we are out of time for questions once again. But if there are any questions, I'm sure that we will be able to answer those offline. We are very happy to make new connections with you. So let us know if you have any questions after the webinar.
And thank you. This is Yasmina again. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for this closeout webinar. I'm so glad that this was the last sort of bringing it all together informational webinar. Again, this webinar has been recorded. We will share all of the mentioned resources and contact information and everything with you. You will be emailed within a week of this webinar. Have a great rest of the day, and we will chat soon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.